One of the areas that is rich with symbology and very difficult and obscure to understand, I think, for the average person is the Book of Leviticus. And this is something you have sort of, I heard you mention it one time in one of your videos, but you didn't really dig into any details about it. And so I'm very interested, which is a lot of the sacrifices that were specified in the Book of Leviticus are gendered. So in some cases, you're told to sacrifice a bull over here, and in this ritual over here, there's like a heifer, like in Numbers, it's like the red heifer, I think is actually in Numbers. And so what's going on with the genders, different genders of sacrifices? Is there significance in that?
No significance whatsoever. No, if you look at the text, I think you'll see a lot of things that are stipulated, and particularly the gender. The gender of sacrifices is often stipulated, but you'll often see other things like a lamb of the first year, for instance, or it will be a particular type of animal that's stipulated beyond the age or sex. The other thing that you notice is the whole sacrificial system is a sort of mapping onto animal life, human society. And so it matters what animal corresponds with what figure. It's not arbitrary. So if you're offering a sin offering for the priest, the high priest, it needs to be a bull. If it's for a leader of the people, it needs to be a male goat. If it's going to be just one of the people more generally, it can be a female sheep or it can be a ram. Now, all of these differences are stipulated. It's not something that is just left for the worshipper to decide, well, I have a bull that I'd like to offer, so I'll offer a bull for my sin offering. No, it's a specific animal that needs to be offered if you're in a particular social status. And then there are allowances for people who are poor. You have turtle doves and pigeons that are permitted for sin offerings. And it's one of the reasons why we will generally deduce that Jesus' family was poor, because they brought 2 turtle doves or pigeons for his presentation in the temple. But there are these details, such as the sex, that suggest that there's maybe more going on here than just that sex has some symbolic role that it's playing within this. And one of the things that it seems to do is connect the male sacrifices with the leaders of the people. So the priests, the high priests, have to be represented by a male bull, or the leader of the people, it has to be a male ram. And the people, it's a sort of animal that represents the son of the herd. It's the sort of husband in many ways that it can represent. And the whole book of Leviticus does have a lot of gendered stuff in it in maybe surprising places. So if you go through the book of Leviticus, again, pay attention to the big patterns. So you've got this new Eden situation set up. The tabernacle is established, the priests within it, and then there's a fall. Nadab and Abihu offer uncalled for fire, and then that fire leads to fire coming out upon them and they're destroyed. And then there's this crisis. How do you deal with this? And after that, there are a series of different judgments or descriptions of how certain things ought to be done. Now, if you go back to the book of Genesis and read the 2 things alongside each other, you'll see that you have the fall, and then you have this sort of casting out. You have a text concerning the animals that are unclean, the attachment that they have to the dirt, to the dust. And so it's a text connected with the serpent. The judgment on the serpent comes first. Then the very next chapter, you have rules concerning the woman and childbirth, which is the next judgment that you have in Genesis chapter 3. Then it's judgment upon the skin in leprosy, the Lord's striking of someone in judgment and leprosy. Then you have the uncleanness of the body and what proceeds from that, and also the expulsion from the camp as a result of uncleanness. And then in chapter 16, you have the Day of Coverings. So how do you deal with the sin of the people, enable them to be covered in their sin, and enable them to have some way back into God's presence? So it's playing out the drama again on a larger scale and in terms of a new sacrificial system that's been set up. And the gendered significance, for instance, of the laws concerning childbirth are important there. So you have different requirements for a daughter that's born or a son that's born. If it's a son that's born, the purification period is 40 days. If it's a daughter that's born, it's 80 days. And so gender is throughout the text in surprising ways. And also the woman is connected with symbolic significance concerning the flow of blood that she has within her. That blood has a charged significance to it. We can even think about the tabernacle itself having some sort of nuptial importance. It is a sort of body, and it represents the Lord's union with his people. And so all of these things need to be understood on a symbolic level, using gendered symbolism and other things to represent higher realities of the Lord's relationship with his people, which is the relationship of a husband to the bride. And within that system, you have male priests, and it's important that they are male priests performing their role relative to the bride. They are the firstborn sons they represent. And so in all of these cases, there is an intensive and extensive use of gendered and other symbolism that helps us also to read from there some of the gendered realities of society more generally.
So with this gendered representation of society from the sacrifices, sort of modeling the society with the male priests and then the followers, etc., does that parallel like other passages? Does that parallel like creation, the creation story, for example, or something like that? Are there like other parallels in the scripture? Or?
Yes, I think you do have relationships with other parts of scripture. Within the creation narratives, Genesis 1 and 2 particularly, you have, this is one of the things that many people miss. They focus upon the passages concerning the creation of man in detachment from the wider fabric of the text. They also tend to take a few key verses in Genesis chapter 2 out of the fabric of that text. So that text has the significance of God creating the man first, and he's creating the man to deal with a problem in the world. There's no one to till the soil. And so the man is created, and then you have the creation of a garden, the waters going out from the garden to water the land, the plants growing up, then the man placed in the garden to God and to serve it, which is priestly language. It's the same language we have for the Levites and the priests in relationship to the tabernacle. And then the man is trained in his father's task. There is very much a sort of patriarchal structure. The Lord is the father and Adam is his son, and he's teaching his son to do his work. And so just as you would have within ancient society and even in modern societies, a father taking his son under his wing and going through the processes of his vocation. So the Lord has not completed his task of creation. The task of creation is open-ended in many ways. So for instance, we see the naming of things on the first 3 days. None of the things on days 4 to 6 are named. That is left for the man to do. There are other things that are left uncompleted. The seas are not completely filled. The fish are given the power to propagate themselves so that the seas can be filled. The heavens are filled with stars in ways that the fish are not. The fish are given a power within themselves that the stars are not, for instance. And if we read the texts alongside each other, we'll also notice some patterns within the creation narrative in chapter 1 and then also between chapter 1 and chapter 2. So within chapter 1, you have the two great lights in the heaven, the sun to rule the day and the moon to rule the night. And that can be paralleled with the sun as the man and then the moon as the woman. And that's something that we find elsewhere in scripture. The moon is
think about Joseph's dream, for example, when the sun, the moon, and the stars are bowing down to his star.
So you have the sun, moon, and 11 stars, and Joseph being another star. You've got the two great lights. The sun represents, as Jacob notices, represents him. The moon represents his mother. And the 11 stars and Joseph's star, they represent the constellations. So the 12 great constellations of the zodiac are represented, or the signs of the zodiac are represented by the 12 stars. And you have that sort of symbolism used on many other occasions in scripture. Then you see the sevenfold pattern that's being replayed in chapter 2. So in chapter 2, you go through the pattern of chapter 1 again. There's formlessness and void state, and then that needs to be addressed by forming and filling. And you start off with a situation, there's no grass and other things that have grown up, or herb that's grown up to fruit trees to cover the earth. There's no man to till the soil, and there's an indiscriminate surge or mist that's watering the earth. There's no rain yet. And so the Lord has to address those situations. And it begins with the creation of the man as a sort of light. Then the next stage, this firmament that divides a heaven realm from the rest. And the heaven realm here is the garden. It's marked out from the rest of the world as a realm where the Lord will dwell. And then the next stage, you have the land divided from the waters, and you have vegetation arising on day 3. And so naturally, you have the rivers going out from the garden that divide out the different lands, which are then named the land of Havilah, things like that, and the 4 riverheads or the riverhead that goes into 4 rivers. And then you have the garden being planted with all these trees and other things growing. And then in day 4, the lights are placed in the firmament to divide the day from the night. And in the same way, the man is placed in the firmament of the garden to divide good from evil. And he's given the rule concerning the tree in that respect. Then on the next days, the animals are brought to the man for him to name. And at the climax, just as there was a second creation act on the 6th day with the creation of man, you have the creation of the woman who's brought to the man. And then the rest, Sabbath rest, is the 2 becoming one flesh and being naked and unashamed together. It's the marriage union. And so naturally, at the end of Scripture, we have those themes coming together: Sabbath rest, completion of creation, and also marriage union.
Yeah, I mean, it's really amazing. I find it really interesting. You know, I just read, and I'm not sure I'm pronouncing his name right, Karl Ove Knausgaard's book, My Struggle, his 6-volume, 3,500-page, autobiographical novel that, like 1 out of every 10 people in Norway bought. Was a big literary sensation. And he had, he's not a Christian, but he had been commissioned to do a translation, to update the Norwegian translation of the Old Testament. And he was talking about how these sort of parallel structures between like the sun and the moon and like the man and the woman, they're just there. Or there's a word that talks about the sun here, and there's a word that talks about the man there, and there's nothing explicit. But yet the fact that they're parallel structures in itself, these metaphors essentially are kind of decisive in how we interpret the text. And that kind of goes along with kind of what you're saying, but I think it's very foreign to our way of reading texts, where we're sort of, purely looking for information content explicitly stated in it.
And much of the meaning of the biblical text comes in the form of poetry. It's the symbolic connections between things that are revealed as you see poetic structures within the text, which the text is making a stronger metaphysical claim at those points. It's not just saying, oh, this is a nice, neat literary device. It's saying something true about the nature of reality. And so you see these sorts of things if you look at the judgments upon the woman and then the man in chapter 3, you can notice parallels between these things. And the ways in which the judgments held together have common features. And one of the things that it's doing is it's frustrating the woman's relationship with her origin, the man from whose side she was taken, and then frustrating the man's relationship with his origin, the earth from which he was taken. And there's gender significance there as well. The earth is connected, it's the Adamites from which the Adam is taken. And so it's a feminine object from which the man is taken. And the woman is related to that too. So the woman and the land have an affinity to each other. The man stands over against both of them, trying to produce seed from in both situations. Now, what we see, for instance, in the juxtaposition of those two things is the relationship between the earth and the womb. And that comes out throughout the rest of the Scripture. So in poetry, in places like Job, naked I came from my mother's womb, naked I will return there. Implicitly, the earth to which you return in death is being described as your mother's womb. Then you see the same thing in Psalm 139, knit together in the lowest parts of the earth. your mother's womb being the lowest parts of the earth. In Genesis chapter 49, blessings of the heavens above and of the deep beneath are blessings of the breasts and of the womb. And there's a connection there with the waters from above, the rains and other things like that, with the breasts, and then the waters from which we drink, and then the waters from which we arise with the deep beneath and the mother's womb. And that's carried out in the Hebrew poetry. You need to see the way it's punning those two terms. And then you get into the New Testament, and this is brought out even more. Jesus is the firstborn from the dead. You have a juxtaposition in the Gospel of Luke, for instance, between Jesus' birth and then his rebirth from the grave, that Jesus is wrapped in swaddling clothes, laid in a manger. He's wrapped in linen garments, laid in a tomb. There's a Mary and Joseph at his birth. There's a Mary and Joseph at his death and burial. And then his raising again is again playing with all of these themes. So at the beginning of the book of Luke, Jesus is presented on the 40th day. He enters into the temple. And on the 40th day after his rebirth from the dead, he enters the heavenly temple as he ascends. And so seeing some of these affinities, these poetic patterns, they're deep within the text and within reality. And as Christians, we just don't pay enough attention to these, but they're all over the text.